Wherever you look and see uncertainty, look just beyond that point and open yourself to the possibility of a shift. I implore you not to give up. Break free from the pain of your past. Remember that it's always progress over perfection. There is no expectation for you to take everything that you've heard me speak about and then immediately implement it into your life. Small, consistent changes are big. You are enough. You have always been enough. You can bring all of who you are, and in that moment, I will hold it, protect it, respect it. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite beverage, and let's go all in. Hello and welcome to Dear Dr. Charryse, a mental health podcast where we discuss life with a lens of neuroscience, integrative health, and mindset so you can learn, grow, and honor the space you're designed to occupy. Let's be real. This is often a time of year and a season of life where you're going to hear things like time to level up, be your best self, reach your highest potential. And don't get me wrong, all of those statements are great and true and necessary. It is not uncommon to be in a situation where you feel like something has to change. I can't do this. I don't want to do this anymore, and it requires some type of investment on your part. But here's the challenge. No one tells you that there's a cost to growth, and you will typically find out along the way because growth is not for the faint, but it is always worth it. Emotional growth in particular, which is going to be a part of anything that you do. And let me just say that as a caveat, there is no growth without emotional growth. You cannot sustain change, new habits, build a mindset without some level of working on your emotional growth, your emotional intelligence, and your emotional maturity. So if you've ever found yourself in a season where you're like, I keep starting and stopping and I create these big plans and this vision board for myself and I don't follow through, at the root of that is some level of emotional growth that is going to be necessary in order for you to step into who you can be. But I want you to recognize and be honest about the pain, the messiness, the setbacks, and sometimes you are going to feel worse before things get better. I sometimes will equate it to a wound that's healing. And sometimes when we can externally see that wound or even internally feel it really, we look at it and we think, man, that doesn't look good. It's throbbing, but it's a part of the healing process. And over time, if we treat that wound appropriately, if we care for it, if we rehab and do the things that we need to do, it functions better, or at least functions in a way that it was designed to, depending upon the severity of the wound. But I think you're picking up what I'm putting down. So here are 6 key points that are often overlooked about emotional growth. Number 1, regression is normal. You're going to have moments where you feel like you're slipping back into old patterns. Part of that is we have certain habits and patterns that are set in place because they're wired into our synapses. It's almost like a well-worn train track that we're used to going down. So whether that's something that you picked up in childhood, whether it's something that you picked up in relationship, things become a cycle and a pattern, and growth will always require you to break those patterns, but regression is part of the process because something will typically come along and trigger you to the point that you're like, oh, I have to go back to the things that I'm comfortable doing. I have to go back to shutting down or ruminating or overcompensating in some area. Don't beat yourself up. if you find that you're in a point of regression. What you can do instead is really stop and go, okay, I see it. I'm aware of the regression. I'm watching myself go through this backtracking and return to things that I said I didn't want to do any longer. And once you're noticing that you're there, work your way back to a neutral point. Recognize I'm back there. What happened? What was the temptation, the trigger, the activation point that made me want to fall back to that? And what can I do to get myself back to the place where I feel like I'm on neutral ground and I'm ready to move forward? But it's going to be an ebb and flow of move forward, back away, move forward, back away. But over time, the ideal goal is that you see as time goes along, you have less regression points. Number 2, discomfort is inevitable. When you are facing emotions head on, it's going to be uncomfortable and sometimes painful. But this is necessary for growth. It's also a necessary part of you breaking away from toxic or damaging or invalidating interpersonal relationships that you have perhaps attached yourself to in your place of unhealth. I want you to consider this from the lens of neuroscience. When we're working towards emotional growth, the limbic system is one of the primary systems of the brain that is involved. The limbic system of the brain is responsible for a significant portion of your behavioral and your emotional responses. So as you're going through and you're trying to kind of break out of your typical habits and your typical mindsets and your typical patterns and the typical people that you connect yourself to, the limbic system is going to strike a chord that says, wait a minute, we're afraid of this. Are you sure this is what we want? While you have then that juicy, yummy, free prefrontal cortex that's going, yes, this is what's necessary in order for us to move forward. And it feels like a tug of war between the limbic system that wants to keep you safe and the prefrontal cortex that says there is a better way and you can tap into it. But the fight is worth it. The other thing that I want to remind you and to point out is in order for you to grow, you will have to face some of your unprocessed traumas. We have a level of consciousness about the things that we've been through that we need to break out of. We know the people that have hurt us or the experiences that have been difficult, and we fully get the ones that we're aware of. But there's a whole deep set of unconscious traumas that come up and steer the way we respond that we're not always aware of. And we may not always be able to name our unconscious traumas, but we can feel them. They're the ones that come up when somebody says something to us that makes us feel like we need to run immediately. It's often this visceral body response. And it doesn't mean that those responses are necessarily incorrect. But sometimes they're wired in because you've had too many unsafe experiences, and growth is going to require you to reintegrate safely with your body, to retrain the way that your mind and your body works together so that you can remind yourself that I'm doing some things that are uncomfortable, but I don't have to be terrified and I don't have to pull away and I don't have to fall back. I can choose little by little to sit with it and to work through it. Other key points. Number 3, it's a lifelong journey. I know you would love to hear that here are your 10 steps to navigating growth. And when you do these 10 things, then you're done. Anyone who tells you that is not telling you the truth. It's a journey. And that doesn't mean that you haven't grown. So if you've ever found yourself in a place that you're like, I thought I have already learned this lesson, what is happening? Sometimes we will have cyclical dynamics come back to us, but you've changed. Who you are at the starting line of that race is different every time you've run it. You're stronger, you're more perceptive, you have a different set of skills, you have a different set of coping, you have a different identity, you have a different level of change talk if you've done the work. So always know that although it is a lifelong journey, it will not always feel grueling. As a matter of fact, you need to have moments that you step back and say to yourself, I am proud of me because I almost didn't make this decision for myself, but then I chose me. Then I decided that I was the assignment and I was going to do what's best for me, which is easy to say coming out my mouth, but let's all be honest. It is difficult to choose ourselves and to choose to release what no longer serves us well. Number 4, self-awareness is key. The moment you stop becoming self-aware is the moment that you're going to find yourself back into that regression line because you've slowly kind of slid back into a place that you said you no longer wanted to be. So you have to make sure that you stay in the process of understanding your triggers, understanding your patterns and your emotions, because that's crucial to managing them effectively. You also want to make sure that you stay self-aware of the people who trigger you into those patterns. It doesn't mean that it's their fault. Our responses are our responsibility. It is no one else's fault how we respond or don't respond, but high self-awareness, deep self-awareness will give us a good level of insight around here are the people that can stay in close connection with me through this version of me that is growing and evolving and healing. And side note, everybody isn't going to stay on the journey with you. There will be some people who were there in one part of the journey, but in order for them to do what they need to do, and in order for you to do what you need to do, you may have to renegotiate the connection. You may have to cut some people off. Those are two different things. You ultimately have to decide that, but you know in your heart, you know in your gut, you know in your brain, you know in your nervous system when you're in safe connection with people and when you're not. Number 5, vulnerability is essential. Now, you might react to the dynamic of vulnerability and go, ooh, I don't know about that. That hasn't gone well in the past. It's a process. And we're not going to experience true growth, true emotional breakthrough without some level of vulnerability. Number 1, the basic vulnerability that you need to have is going to be with yourself. So I'm not jumping you into feeling like you need to be vulnerable with everyone else, because that's not true. Everybody cannot handle your vulnerability. Everybody should not be given the privilege of experiencing your vulnerability, but you need to have access to inner vulnerability for yourself, because that is where the depth of your self-awareness, your honesty, and uprooting those unprocessed traumas truly lies. And then you will get to the point where you recognize, what do I need to see out of the people in my life before I feel comfortable about sharing what I'm feeling, about being open with where I'm struggling? Because it's also a powerful tool to tell somebody, hey, I'm not in the same place that I'm used to, that you're used to. I know that you're used to me showing up like this, but I'm really working not to show up like that anymore. So that's going to change the way that we engage, but know that it's not personal. It's something that I'm doing for myself. That's an example of the kind of vulnerability that helps us move forward without feeling handicapped or not feeling like we're in a situation where we can't grow, because if we grow, then we can't be what everybody else wants. And by the way, that is true. When you're operating in a spirit and a path of true emotional growth, you will have to cut the cord to people pleasing. You will have to take a hard and honest look at who are the people in your life that maintain who you are, the way you are, and where are you staying that way so that they can be comfortable while you're uncomfortable, but not in a way that is moving you forward. You're uncomfortable in a way that is dialing you down and making you feel numb and like you want to escape. And number 6, seeking support is not a weakness. There are times in our life where we need to have support when it comes to our emotional growth. How do you know you're in a place that you would benefit from support? Well, if you see that you're in a situation where your growth is incurring so much pain that you're feeling like you're debilitated, then seek support that can help be there for you, that can give you a different set of tools and skills. If you see that you're in a situation that you keep getting stuck at the same point, you do well up until a certain point, or you can't get past a certain habit or a pattern, be coached up. That's when it's great to bring in a coach, a therapist, other complementary agents that can help support you in the process. And that could be a number of different things depending upon what you're open to. But there is no award for trying to manage your emotional growth by yourself. It actually says so much about your ability to grow when you are able to reach out to someone. What I will say is be cautious about seeking support from friends who are not equipped to be what you need. Friends are great. They can be great empathetic listeners, not advice givers. They're not trained. They're not always going to be available to you. At the end of the day, our emotional growth has to be our personal responsibility. It's wonderful to have somebody else there to talk to and to periodically lean on. But you must learn to lean on yourself more than anything. Go back and listen to these pieces. Notice where you are. Notice if you're missing any of these elements or been resistant to any of them. Let's say that you're listening to this and you are currently in a place where you are like, it is so painful, Dr. Charryse. I don't know if I want to do this anymore. You can't afford not to. Because the cost of staying where you are is typically going to be greater than the cost of working through the discomfort. Change and emotional growth is messy, is uncomfortable, is hard, but you're worth it. And who you will be and the part of you that will be allowed to surface and integrate and rise on the other side will be worth it. The health of the relationships and the jobs and the partnerships that will come because you're in better alignment will be worth it. You are worth the work. Period. Do what you can. Take the knowledge you have. Apply every tool you can, and then step into your power. As always, thank you for joining me for another episode of Dear Dr. Charryse. Remember that this podcast is available on all podcast platforms where you can listen to it by audio or by video on Spotify and YouTube. If you love this podcast, follow me on YouTube, but also share this. Share this with someone who might be looking for resources, who might be looking for encouragement. And look at the show notes below for all the places that you and I can stay in connection, because I want to hear from you. I want to hear how this touched you, what resonated, where you need more. And remember, knowledge is not power without application. So do the work, because you are worth it.